Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Parshas Beha'alotcha, Tavshin Pei Aleph. I'd like to dedicate this shir memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. We're going to begin from Perek Tes, chapter 9, Pasuk Tes Vav, verse 15. And tonight, we'll talk about two very interesting points in the parsha. So, I'm going to read it in English because there's a number of verses that I want to read. So the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle that was a tent for the testimony. And in the evening, there would be upon the tabernacle like a fiery appearance until morning. So during the day, there was a cloud that rested on the Mishkan of the tabernacle, which was the temple for the Jewish people in the desert. And then in the evening, there was a fiery appearance that rested upon the tabernacle. So it would always be, the Torah continues. The cloud would cover it, and an appearance of fire at night. And in accordance with the lifting of the cloud from atop the tent, meaning when the cloud would rise up from the tent, afterwards the children of Israel would journey. And in the place where the cloud would rest, there the children of Israel would encamp. The sign for the Jewish people to travel was when the cloud went up from atop the Mishkan, atop the tabernacle, and when it came to rest on top, that's where they knew they had to set up the camp again. According to the word of Hashem, would the children of Israel journey, and according to the word of Hashem, would they encamp. All the days that the cloud would rest upon the tabernacle, they would encamp. When the cloud lingered upon the tabernacle many days, the children of Israel would maintain the charge of Hashem and would not journey. Sometimes the cloud would be upon the tabernacle for a few days. According to the word of Hashem, would they encamp, and according to the word of Hashem, would they journey. And sometimes the cloud would remain from evening until morning, and the cloud would be lifted in the morning, and they would journey, or for a day and a night. And the cloud would be lifted, and they would journey. Or for 2 days, or for a month, or days, when the cloud would linger over the tabernacle resting upon it, the children of Israel would encamp and would not journey. When it was lifted, they would journey. According to the word of Hashem would they encamp, and according to the word of Hashem would they journey. The charge of Hashem would they safeguard, according to the word of Hashem through Moshe. So lots of description of how the Jewish people traveled by the word of Hashem, which they saw when the cloud would rise up from off the tabernacle, and they would know to camp where the cloud rested. And when the cloud again would start moving, they would move. And sometimes for a longer period of time, sometimes for a shorter period of time. But the rule was, Al Pi Hashem Yachnu, Al Pi Hashem Yiso. By the command of God, they encamped. By the command of God, they traveled. So it's very clear there's lots of, there's a very lengthy description here of all this. And the question is, why so much description? So I brought down a very interesting medrash. It's from the medrash called Medrash HaGadol. And Medrash HaGadol says that the reason why the Torah goes through so much length to explain how the Jewish people traveled and encamped was because of the fact that the nations who were observing the Jewish people, the way they saw the Jewish people traveling, they thought the Jewish people were lost in the desert, and Moshe himself was lost and didn't know where to lead them. So they went haphazardly here, there, for this amount of time, that amount of time. And therefore, the Torah comes to explain that all their travels were according to the divine presence. And even though they rested in this place for a night and this place for a month, all was according to divine presence. When the cloud moved from this place to a different place, they would travel to that place. So the Medrash is saying that in order to make it clear that Moshe and the Jewish people were not camping the way they did because they were just lost, it was because whenever Hashem signaled them to go, that's when they went. And even though it seemed very erratic, sometimes here for a long time, just for a short period of time, it seemed erratic. It seemed like they were lost. No, just know, says the Torah, Al Pi Hashem Yisav, Al Pi Hashem Yachanu. Everything was by the command of Hashem. So I was thinking the following. The way the Medrash says it is, Medrash says, in order to counter that which the nations were saying that Israel is lost in the desert. So it's to counter what the nations were saying. So now that the Torah says it, the nations are going to say otherwise. Do they really care what the Torah says? And for the Jewish people that were present, they understood. They were told, they understood. If the cloud rises and goes, they go. And they know that was Hashem's command. So who is this message for? To counter the claims of the nations. Who is it for? The answer would be, it's not for the nations. It's not for the Jewish people then, but it's for us. It's for generations later, who perhaps, if the Torah wouldn't have gone through this lengthy description, we on our own would assume or have basis to say it was by Hashem's command. But without that explicit mentioning of the Torah, if we would hear others claiming that, you know what this was about, it was just lost, we may accept what they're saying. We're very quick to be influenced by what others say about us. It's all part of the Yetzer Hara. It's part of the evil inclinations challenging us. He brings the other nations of the world, people from outside our nation, to throw criticism at us. And we say, maybe that's what it is, or throw challenges at us. And we say, maybe they're right. We tend to do that. If they're going to say that, why we're traveling this way and that way, and for all these short periods of time, and from here to there, and doesn't seem like there's any kind of order, because you guys were lost. And we might accept that. Therefore, the Torah tells us, no, that it was not erratic. It was not, they were lost. It was all based on what Hashem showed them, and Hashem signaled them, and Hashem commanded them. Now, this lesson, therefore, or like of all the things the Torah tells us, are always meant to be a lesson for all generations. And the lesson to us is, in our lives, that if sometimes we land up in places or in situations during our lifetime, and we say to ourselves, how do we get here? How do we get into this? It seems like it just came upon us. We just happened to be here. The answer is, there's no such thing as you just happened to be here. The Jewish people in the desert went from place to place, situation to situation, based on the command of God. That's how it is for all generations, for everywhere that we land up, for everywhere that we go, from a situation we land ourselves up in. The Jewish people saw it. The Jewish people saw God telling them, go here, stop here, go here, stop here. We don't get to see that clearly. But the Torah is telling us, just know that wherever life takes you, and you're wondering, how did I get here? What am I doing here? The answer is, Al Pi Hashem, Yachanu Al Pi Hashem Yisod. Wherever you go and wherever you come to rest is all based on the guiding hand of Hashem. And there are some times that we get to see that clearly, and there are some times where we eventually have a chance to see Hashem's guiding hand, even when at some point of time it wasn't clear to us. And sometimes we don't. And that's our faith. That's our emunah, our faith that everything is guided from Hashem. But there are times where we have the schus, we have the merit to see that. And I'll share with you an interesting story. This story is told by Rabbi Leib Lamb of Monsey, New York, and he heard the story directly from Rabbi Mordechai Schwab, Zatzal. Mordechai Schwab was a very prominent rabbi in Monsey. He was a great tzaddik, a very righteous person, and he told a story from and he told the story to Rabbi Lamb, a story that had happened 75 years. He told him 75 years after the story took place, that Rabbi Schwab, as a young man, had gone to see the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, known as the Chavetz Chaim, the great sage of the time, leader of the Jewish people, whose works and words we study and influence to this day. And he went to visit the Chavetz Chaim. Rabbi Kagan was known as the Chavetz Chaim because of one of the books that he wrote. And when it came time to take leave of the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Schwab, the young Mordechai Schwab, shook hands with him, and the Chavetz Chaim grasped his hand firmly. And then the Chavetz Chaim seemed to doze off. The young Mordechai Schwab tried to gently remove his hand. But when he did, the Chavetz Chaim held on even tighter as he appeared to be sleeping. Rabbi Schwab called out to the sleeping Chavetz Chaim that he needed to go to catch his train. But his grip was firm and he was stuck. After a period of time, Chavetz Chaim awakened and he released the young man. He hurried to town only to discover they had missed his train. Later, it was learned that the train he was hoping to travel on was in one of the worst train accidents in Poland's history. Sometimes we get to see Hashem's guiding hand, even though we didn't know what was happening at the time, but we get to see his guiding hand. And that is what the Parsha is teaching us. Parsha is teaching us that wherever life brings you, and you don't understand what you're doing there, how'd you get there, just know, just as a Jewish people, we're never lost in the desert. And as haphazard and erratic their schedule seemed to be, it was never haphazard. It was never out of order. They were never lost. They were always being guided by the hand of Hashem. They saw that, and that's a lesson for us, for all situations we find ourselves in. And the next lesson I want to teach you, I want to share with you, comes from later on in the Parsha. And this is from Perek Aleph, chapter 11, verse 10. And the Torah tells us, which is translated, the rabble that were among them cultivated a craving. And the children of Israel also turned and they wept and said, who will feed us meat? Now, the Jewish people in the desert survived the desert, sustained themselves in the desert, because there was the mun, the food that fell from heaven. They had the rock that gave them water. And it's pretty clear they had other sources of food also. So it would seem that they were pretty set. Nonetheless, the Torah tells us the rabble, referring to the Egyptians who came along with the Jewish people when they left Egypt, they cultivated a craving. They started talking about something that they really wanted, and they got the Jewish people worked into it also. And what did they say? Mi achilenu basar. Who will feed us meat? So charnu es hadaga asher neicha b'Mitzrayim chinam. We remember the fish that would eat in Egypt free of charge. As hakishuim es havatichim es hachotzer es habsalim es hashumim. The cucumbers and the melons, the leeks, the onions and the garlic. But now our life is parched, there is nothing. We have nothing before our eyes but the mun. So here we have the Jewish people complaining that in Egypt, when they were slaves, they seemingly are saying, we ate better than we do now. Or now we just have that mun. And we used to have a variety of different foods then. Now, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the medrash that says that the mun, in this food that fell from the sky, had a so to speak, default flavor, like a sweet type of baked food. But if you wanted to, it could taste like anything you wanted. Rashi here seems to say that the things that some of the things at least mentioned here are things that were not included in the tastes of the mun for a certain reason. But nonetheless, it's really problematic to understand what's going on here. How is it that a people who saw miracles coming out of Egypt, and let's not forget, it's not that long afterwards that they've experienced those miracles. They're experiencing daily miracles in the desert. They're not missing anything. They're not lacking anything. They have water, they have food. They're not lacking anything. So how does it come about that they start complaining that, we used to have this, we used to have that, we used to have meat, we don't have meat anymore, and we used to have all these different vegetables. And what Hashem basically does is Hashem tells them, okay, I'm going to give you meat. I'm going to give you at the end, he sends them the quail, the birds that came to the desert and that they ate meat from. But it's still very hard to understand why the big fuss after everything they've experienced. And I found an interesting explanation, which is an explanation that, is very relevant to all of us. And again, you can still wonder after all is said and done, after this explanation, but again, people who experience miracles were slaves and they experienced miracles. And they had nothing missing. It's still kind of hard to understand, that such people should, complain the way they did, even after we explain it and give some kind of explanation. It's still hard to grasp it. But if the Torah is telling us this, it's there for us to learn from, and therefore we take out of it what we can relate to, and relate it to the Jewish people, that at some level this was present when they complained. There may be a much deeper understanding to their complaint, but it relates back to a trait, let's call it, that relates to us, because we have to be able to learn from whatever the Torah tells us. So there's got to be a trait here that was present that we can learn from. So the explanation I saw was like this. The Jewish people clearly had lots of things. They definitely had their needs, but they were complaining about things that they didn't have. Human beings have a nature that if they don't focus on the positive, they don't focus on what they have and work on appreciating it, they will automatically go to what they don't have. That's the way we are. Unless we put in the effort to recognize what we have, we will always focus on what we don't have. And at some level, that's what was happening here in the Jewish people. Sure, they had all these things, but if you don't remain focused on what you have, which means focused and appreciative of what you have, then you're automatically going to look at what you don't have. There is a reason why we make so many brachas, so many blessings, and we daven 3 times a day, and we're always acknowledging that everything we have is from Hashem. It's because we need to stay focused on what we have. We need to appreciate what we have, because otherwise we're just going to focus on what we don't have and be miserable. That's what was happening here with the Jewish people. At some level, they were not remaining focused on the tremendous gifts that they've been given, and therefore they started focusing on what they don't have. But if a person remains focused on what they do have, then life takes on a whole different picture. And it's not only that we have to remain focused on what we have and not focus on what we don't have, but in a similar way, it's not a but, in a similar way, we can do many things. And we can, instead of focusing on what we've done and what we've accomplished and be thankful and appreciate what we've done, we're right away focused on, I have so much more to do, but I haven't done this. I still have to do that. The person has no satisfaction in what they do when they think about things like that. And that's what the Torah is telling us here. We have to put in the effort. We have to be conscious, make ourselves conscious of what we have, of what we've received, of what we've accomplished. And when that happens, life takes on a much more positive look. Things much brighter, because look, Baruch Hashem, thank God, look at what I have. Look what I've accomplished. But we have to put in the effort for that. If we don't put in the effort, then we automatically go into what we don't have. And we're automatically focusing on the negative, and therefore we see life through a negative lens. So the parasha is telling us some very important lessons. As we started off, if you don't know how you got somewhere, you're wondering what you're doing here, and things seem to be out of order and you seem to be lost and erratic, know that Hashem is guiding you as he guided the Jewish people in the desert. It looked like they were lost. They weren't. And you may think you're lost, you're not. And at the same time, even after you recognize what you've received from Hashem, you could start still complaining to him and saying, but I don't have this, and I don't have that. Now, at some level, there are certain times, or certain situations where we are missing something, and we do feel what we're missing. And there are times where we have to revert, we have to go to our emunah, our faith and trust in Hashem, that what we have is what we need, and what we don't have is what we don't need. There are times we definitely need to look at things like that. But there's another way of approaching when we face that feeling that we're missing. And that is, focus first on what you have. Learn to appreciate what you have. Put in the effort to appreciate and focus on what you have. And when you do that, life will take on a much more positive outlook. You may not even think about what you're missing. Sometimes you can't avoid what you're missing. You can't not feel it. That's when we revert to emunah, to faith, bitachon, and trust in Hashem. But there is, let's call it an earlier stage. And that is, focus on what Hashem is giving you. Focus on what Hashem has blessed you with. And if you put an effort to focus on that, life will be brighter, life will be more fulfilling, life will be happier. Have a wonderful Shabbos.